I really can't stress enough just how close we were to losing our democracy on January the 6th. And that's becoming clearer and clearer with each new piece of information we get from the investigation. The latest being over 2,000 text messages obtained by CNN between then White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows and allies of Donald Trump between Election Day 2020 and President Biden's inauguration. But what struck me most are the dates these messages were sent, particularly those that were sent after the insurrection on January 6th, like this one from Marjorie Taylor Greene on January the 17th, where she sends a message to Mark Meadows claiming that several lawmakers are saying, quote, the only way to save our republic is for Trump to call for martial law, misspelled. Doesn't appear that Meadows responded to that message, but notice when it was actually sent 11 days after the insurrection, at a time when we already knew people died as a result of the attack on the Capitol. NBC News has not independently verified all of the text messages and has reached out to the participants for comment. Here to discuss, friend of the show, our buddy Glenn Kirshner. He's a former federal prosecutor and MSNBC legal analyst. Glenn, what stood out to you the most about these text messages?
That it's more evidence that tells us the Department of Justice should have a criminal conspiracy investigation up and running on Mark Meadows and Marjorie Taylor Greene and anybody else for whom law enforcement has adequate predication to investigate. That's a fancy word that, and all it means is enough evidence. And Zerlina, the standard for the FBI to open a criminal investigation could not be lower. That a federal crime may have been committed or is in the process of being committed or might be committed in the future. There is evidence to suggest. And, there is so much predication, Zerlina, that I would sleep better at night if I just knew the Department of Justice was actively criminally investigating all of Donald Trump's crimes and his co-conspirators both in and out of Congress. Because if we knew that that was happening, if we knew that DOJ was not just going after the foot soldiers, the angry mob that Donald Trump set on the Capitol on January 6th, but they were working their way up to the command structure, the people who funded and organized and incited the insurrection and covered it up thereafter, gave aid and comfort to those who participated in the insurrection. I think we would all sleep a whole lot better knowing DOJ was digging into all that.
So one of the things that stood out to me is just how many people are involved in these conversations. I mean, we got group threads, we got group chats. We have messages from Marjorie Taylor Greene, who had been elected to Congress for 5 minutes, and she's texting the chief of staff talking about martial law. You have sitting members of Congress on these messages. You have the Trump children on these messages. Talk about who could potentially be caught up in the conspiracy, as you laid it out, and how these messages show really a consciousness of guilt, because the way they're talking about the violence, the potential for violence, they're totally aware of why the people went there on January 6th and what potentially could happen.
Yeah, Zerlina, you're exactly right to put your finger on the consciousness of guilt piece, because it's one thing to have evidence of crime in your text messages, your emails, your DMs. But it's another thing when you're trying to cover up your own conduct, because that, you only try to cover up something if you know you did wrong. And let's just look at Marjorie Taylor Greene's own testimony a few days ago. I can't remember ever discussing martial law. Now we have text messages that put the lie to her testimony just last Friday. So, people ask, well, will she be charged with perjury because she lied under oath in this litigation that is being conducted to try to prevent her from holding office in the future because she participated in the insurrection? She probably won't be charged with perjury. But what I maintain these text messages are, it's evidence of the cover-up that she continues to participate in, covering up her own conduct, covering up Donald Trump's conduct. And all of that should come home to roost. And it should be considered, again, by the FBI, by the Department of Justice, in assessing whether she should be criminally charged as being part of the conspiracy to commit offenses against the United States by trying to overturn the election results.
One of the other things that's coming through in these text messages is how the mood and attitudes towards the vice president shifted throughout the course of time as they got closer to January 6th and on January 6th. And I want to play a clip from Congressman Jamie Raskin, member of the January 6th committee. He was on MSNBC talking about Mike Pence and some of the things that happened that day. Let's take a look at that.
So when I heard him, I heard that he said, "I'm not getting in that car." That was utterly chilling to me. Those are 6 of the most chilling words in American history to me, because they were trying to remove him from the situation. And of course, there had been this effort to try to get Trump just to invoke martial law under the Insurrection Act.
I mean, Glenn, even the day of, it seemed very strange that supporters of the Trump-Pence administration would be chanting "Hang Mike Pence." Do these text messages give us any insight into perhaps the directive and the conversations around what the vice president, they wanted him to do and what he obviously did not do on that day, and whether or not Pence seemed to know about that? I mean, and essentially he's running for his life and outside they're chanting "Hang Mike Pence." These text messages give us some insight into maybe why they were chanting that.
Yeah, they sure do. And, you know, Mike Pence certainly knew what was at stake. Remember, he was seeking out information and advice from, you know, people up to and including Dan Quayle. Do I have any other alternative but to preside, count the votes, and certify Joe Biden's win? Mike Pence obviously concluded he had no other alternative or authority. And I agree with Representative Raskin. When Mike Pence said, "I'm not getting in that car, I'm not leaving that building," that is chilling. And it tells us that Mike Pence knew what was at stake. How could he not, given the way the president he served and the president to whom he was too subservient at times had been doing everything he could corruptly to try to reinstall himself for a second term as president, notwithstanding the popular vote and the Electoral College vote. So Mike Pence clearly knew what was up. He did the right thing. I'm loath to call him heroic, but he certainly helped save our democracy when it needed to be saved.
He definitely stood in the void and upheld the law. I mean, that's what you're supposed to do when you're sworn in, to uphold and protect the Constitution. But it is good that he chose to do that in this instance. Glenn Kirshner, thank you so much for being here, and please stay safe. Hi, I'm Zerlina Maxwell. Thanks for checking out our channel on YouTube. You can see more from Zerlina by clicking any of the videos on this screen, and make sure you subscribe below to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. Thanks for watching.